We made it through winter, and what a winter it was. But no matter how much we enjoy it, for me, the best thing about winter is that it eventually ends. And so, once the ice was cleared, I was able to put my boat back into operation. After all, we were frozen in for almost 2 entire months. First, I'm checking the motors. Next, the throttle levers. The bow thruster. And steering. Everything was in working condition, and so we headed back to our old spot. And there they are, my other boats, sad and neglected. A quick docking maneuver, and with that, we are back. Once we arrived, I checked for any damage. It rained a lot over the past few days, so I had to pump out a lot of water. But other than that, everything was in tip-top shape. All in all, I'm ready for the new season. But before we move on from winter, I have to tell you what I was working on most of that time, namely my new sewage treating system. This is a fully biological mini wastewater treatment system called Enteron. It uses bacteria to break down black water and then, through a series of automated processes, filters and disinfects it before safely discharging the treated water back into the environment. And please note, this isn't a paid review. I chose this system myself and paid for it. I don't earn anything from advertising or sales, but I still want to mention the company because I think they've come up with a really good solution for dealing with wastewater. I opted for the smallest version, which needs a separate holding tank, here in blue. I'll explain how the whole system works at the end of the video, but for now, let's get everything installed. First, I drill a few holes into the holding tank for the extraction pipe, the inlet and ventilation fittings. I'm also adding a submersible probe to measure the hydrostatic pressure of the liquid, which gives us an accurate reading of the tank level, even though the system already has its own sensors. I'm using PVC pipes wherever I can because they're highly modular, easy to work with and much cheaper than specialized blackwater hoses. Once they're glued together, they can be neatly attached to the tank using these clamps. I made wooden spacers for the clamps so that all the pipes are at the same height above the tank. Here's the pump used to transfer the black water from the holding tank into the bioreactor tank. I added a 3-way valve in case I ever need to pump out the holding tank directly. With that, the easy part is done. Next we have to go under deck to prepare the area where the sewage system will be installed. For this, I'm first going to do some light metal work by removing the paint that's already coming loose in some areas. To make sure I'm not scraping into the final layer of rust that's keeping the river water out, I take some measurements of the steel thickness. I find around 5 mm, which is more than enough. Now that I know there's plenty of steel thickness, I can scrape away the loose rust layers. After removing the remaining loose rust and paint, I can apply some fresh paint. Finally, I install some wooden strips onto the steel framing and then a wooden floor. The entire system fits in an area of about 1 meter by 1 meter. Despite the compact size, I realized that the sewage treating unit won't fit past this first steel support beam. Luckily, it's only riveted, so I can use a drill, hammer and chisel to remove the rivets and get the steel beam out of the way. Removing the rivets is fairly simple. I start by drilling a few small holes, then gradually make them bigger, and in the end I knock out the rest with a hammer and chisel. Now comes the tricky part of fitting the Enteron down the hatch into the belly of the ship. During this process you can see why I had to go with the smallest version with the separate holding tank, because if it were even a couple centimeters larger, it probably wouldn't have fit at all. Next we have to get through the narrow door. Here the fit is even tighter, and with that our mini sewage plant is now at its final destination. Next comes the blue holding tank. This one fits a little easier. Now we can reassemble the PVC pipes, and the rest of the plumbing can wait until the final assembly. Next I'm going to drill some holes for the water inlet and outlet into that big pipe that goes through the hull of the boat. First I'm going to drill the hole for the black water inlet. And just look how thick the steel on this pipe is. Next I drill a hole for the clear water outlet and a hole for the ventilation through hull. This one goes to the outside of the boat. To bring the black water to the holding tank, I use some more PVC pipes, and with that the plumbing on the side of the tanks is ready for final assembly. Next I have to make a simple fixture for the ventilation filter, which I want to install as high as possible under the ceiling, so I need to come up with a system that allows me to remove it and put it at a lower position for maintenance. Here's the through-hull fitting for the ventilation pipe, and the filter is installed right behind the tanks. Now for warranty purposes, the installation of the remaining rubber pipes is done by a technician from the manufacturer. Things needed to go fast, so I wasn't able to film that. And so, here is our Enteron mini sewage treating plant. The plumbing is all done, but before I can show you how the system works, I have to set up the electronics. For this I had to rework the entire DC distribution system of my boat, which wasn't really properly installed until now. First I had to come up with a location for the main switch panel. I chose the area in the kitchen here, for which I made a simple frame. I've repurposed some parts I had installed in my first boat, but were total overkill for that boat. They're made by my friends at Philippi, a renowned German manufacturer of high-end electronic components. I put the main switch panel here at the bottom with a very simple pivoting system, so I can easily access the cables in the back. Next comes the tank sensor board and a simple fuse box. A battery shunt and a digital main switch go next to the 24-volt battery pack. And then came the tedious task of pulling the cables underneath the floor to connect the switch panel to the battery, which is a path of over 10 meters, climbing up and down my self-built furniture, underneath the floor, past the wall and under the bed. On the side of the toilet, I had to remove the splash panels to access some of the cables, and while doing that, I also insulated the water pipes to prevent condensation during the winter months. Here I've added some soundproofing to reduce the noise from the water pump. Next I'm wiring up the fuse panel. And of course, I made all the cables neat and tidy. Later I can add a nicer frame to the switch panel, maybe a plexiglass plate to cover it, but with that I have to wait until a later date. To get the power control wires for the sewage treating unit under deck, I drilled a couple of holes through the deck. And with that, I can now run the remaining wires. I'm using a professional label maker to make new labels for the switches. These can then simply be taped onto the switch panel. Now is a good time to remove the protective film from the touchscreen. Of course, I've wired the existing pumps and equipment, such as the toilet and freshwater pump, to the new switchboard. And with that, our new DC electrical system is done. The control unit and remote for the sewage system are placed next to the toilet. For now, I've made a somewhat temporary, quick and simple installation. And so here's how it works. Black water first goes into the holding tank. From there, it's transferred into the Enteron bioreactor, where the organic waste is broken down by a living bacterial culture. These are added by the user via self-dissolving tablets of bacterial concentrate. Inside the reactor, air is added to supply oxygen and support the process. The wastewater is also recirculated by a macerator pump, which continuously shreds solids and helps prevent sludge buildup and clogging. After that, the clarified water passes through a pre-filter into a third tank, where any remaining fine particles can settle out. Finally, the treated water is disinfected with UVC light, then pumped out and reintroduced into the river system. In this way, the system can process up to 50 liters per day. The amount of clarified water is shown on the main display. There are also 2 Bluetooth water sensors, which can be monitored via an app. And so that's our Enteron mini sewage treating system for boats.